Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the anatomy of an absolute phenomenon. We are talking about the meticulously crafted alchemy that took a scrappy little cover band and turned them into a literal global cultural tremor. The Rolling Stones didn't just play music, right? They completely reshaped the landscape of popular music forever. And today, we're going to see exactly how they built that massive legacy.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the blueprint of rebellion, look at how they crafted their outsider image, and then see how they forged their sonic identity. After that, we'll explore how they expanded their musical palette, dive deep into their era of masterpieces, and finally, wrap up with their legacy of authenticity.
So Section 1, the blueprint of rebellion, setting the stage in 1962, post-war Britain.
Imagine a sound so raw, so untamed, it felt less like music and more like a primal scream. That quote perfectly captures the seismic shift they caused. They weren't even a little bit interested in the predictable pop of the era. Instead, they were channeling this primal energy that swaggered with actual, genuine danger.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark musical contrast of the time. Back in 1962, the British airwaves were completely dominated by saccharine pop and clean-cut crooners. It was all very safe. But bubbling up underneath was the electrifying sound of American blues and R&B, legends like Chuck Berry, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf. While most of Britain was tapping along to safe pop ballads, two schoolmates, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, were absolute disciples of this gritty American sound. They saw a massive cultural vacuum, and they decided, well, they were going to fill it.
Which brings us to the original lineup. You've got Mick Jagger's undeniable vocal prowess and magnetism, paired with Keith Richards' unforgettable riffs. But to really make this work, they needed kindred spirits. Enter Brian Jones, a brilliant experimenter, Ian Stewart, a literal boogie-woogie piano virtuoso, and Dick Taylor, their original bassist. It was this highly specific alchemy, these working-class lads cramming themselves into damp rehearsal spaces to meticulously reinterpret covers, but doing it with this fierce, youthful British edge.
Moving into Section 2, crafting the outsider image, a look at their calculated rise.
Now, you might be wondering, how exactly did a handful of working-class lads conjure up a force that would eventually conquer the globe? Because, it wasn't just raw talent. There was a highly strategic ambition driving them. They realized that music could act as a release valve for a whole generation's pent-up frustration, and they leaned into that entirely.
What's really interesting about this slide is that their outsider image was absolutely not an accident. Think about the dominant bands of the era. The Beatles were seen as the boy-next-door type, clean-cut, safe, polished. The Stones deliberately positioned themselves as the absolute antithesis of that. Actually, scratch that. It's more like they weaponized it. They became the bad boys of rock. They cultivated this intense aura of danger, rebellion, and gritty anti-establishment fashion. And by doing that, they practically invented the modern bad boy PR archetype that artists are still using today.
Up next, Section 3, Forging a Sonic Identity. The critical transition from playing blues covers to original songwriting. A massive part of this new sonic identity actually came down to one revolutionary trick, Keith Richards' use of open G tuning. Now, instead of flashy, traditional solos, this tuning allowed for a much looser, incredibly percussive sound. It formed a rhythmic and melodic backbone rather than just traditional chordal playing. It created these hypnotic, interlocking guitar parts that were just the perfect, gritty canvas to complement Jagger's dark, sardonic narratives.
Tracking this evolution is super fascinating. In their early phase, tracks like Tell Me and Not Fade Away really hinted at their massive potential and unique texture. But their true arrival as a songwriting unit, that was absolutely, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Legend has it, Keith Richards woke up in the middle of the night, recorded that iconic fuzz-toned guitar riff onto a little cassette player, and went right back to sleep. That driving rhythm was an absolute masterclass in capturing the exact zeitgeist of an unfulfilled generation.
All right, Section 4, expanding the musical palette, the deep dive into studio obsession.
Behind the scenes, producer Andrew Lou Oldham played a truly pivotal role. He was the one pushing their rebellious persona to the absolute limit and forcing them to write original material. But while Oldham guided the image, the real creative engine was internal. It was that constant, brilliant friction between Jagger's theatrical showmanship and Richards' raw musical instinct that truly drove them forward.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because their sound just exploded outward during this time. They started incorporating folk, country, and even psychedelic rock. Brian Jones was instrumental here,
adding these amazing exotic textures with instruments like the sitar and the marimba. You can hear those diverse influences front and center on tracks like Paint It Black and Under My Thumb. But no matter how far they explored musically, they always kept that core blues rock sensibility totally intact.
Bringing us to Section 5, an era of masterpieces, the golden era from the late 60s to the early 70s.
This period is arguably the most unprecedented run in rock history. We're talking 4 absolute masterworks released essentially back-to-back. Beggar's Banquet in '68, Let It Bleed in '69, Sticky Fingers in '71, and Exile on Main Street in '72. These weren't just simple rebellion anthems anymore. They were incredibly complex sonic tapestries that profoundly explored love, loss, and sharp social commentary.
Zeroing in on just 2 of these giants really shows their massive range. Sticky Fingers, famous for that Andy Warhol zipper cover, gave us these incredible country and gospel blends on tracks like Brown Sugar and the super vulnerable Wild Horses. And then there's Exile on Main Street. Recorded while the band was holed up in a sun-drenched French villa basement, this sprawling double album is widely considered their magnum opus. It proved they were totally willing to embrace the messy, beautiful imperfection of their art.
And finally, Section 6, the legacy of authenticity, what we can learn from their enduring blueprint.
So, the crucial point is that they prove something incredibly important. Messy, unvarnished imperfection connects deeply with audiences. The Stones showed the world that rock and roll didn't need to be perfectly polished. It needed to be a true reflection of life's glorious, gritty, and sometimes dangerous complexity.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to wrap up on. Does true musical innovation require us to completely embrace our deepest influences while simultaneously and fearlessly exposing our unvarnished imperfections? The alchemy of the Rolling Stones suggests a resounding yes. They laid down a blueprint for authentic art that absolutely still echoes today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I highly encourage you to go back and listen to those legendary tracks with fresh ears.